Michael Thompson stood behind one-way glass, watching his 4-year-old son stare blankly at the NeuroLearn screen displaying error 847. In the conference room beyond, 15 engineers had spent 6 months arguing over algorithms that refused to work. The woman in the gray hoodie had been there only 30 seconds, quietly observing as little Ethan arranged blue blocks into perfect patterns, then suddenly scattered them across the floor, only to start building again. She whispered something about the boy not failing but resetting, about algorithms needing to learn that exact behavior. Michael gripped the tiny wooden hourglass tighter, unaware that the answer his team couldn't solve in half a year was standing right behind him. "Maybe we're solving the wrong problem," he muttered, not knowing the soft-spoken Nanny had just cracked the code that would change everything. The Victorian house in Palo Alto's Professorville neighborhood had become Michael's fortress of solitude since Sarah died 18 months ago. Paint peeled from the wraparound porch where she used to sit with her morning coffee, watching Stanford students bike to class. Inside, modern technology clashed with century-old architecture. Smart home panels mounted beside original crown molding, Ethernet cables snaking around antique baseboards. The converted garage housed NeuroLearn technologies, where 50 employees worked in an open-plan space that still smelled faintly of motor oil and old wood. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows on whiteboards covered in algorithmic equations that led nowhere. Michael had started the company for one reason: traditional autism interventions failed his son spectacularly. Ethan needed solutions that didn't exist in the world, technology that could understand his unique mind, rather than trying to force it into neurotypical patterns. The pressure from investors was mounting like a storm system. 6 weeks until product launch, and their core algorithm remained fundamentally broken. Every day brought new error reports, frustrated beta testers, and increasingly tense board meetings. Michael's personal savings had evaporated into research and development costs. If NeuroLearn failed, he would lose everything: the company, the house, and his son's best hope for independence. The Nanny interviews had been a parade of disappointments. Candidates arrived with degrees in child development, elaborate theories about autism intervention, and condescending assumptions about Ethan's capabilities. They spoke about him as if he weren't in the room, using clinical language that reduced his vibrant personality to a collection of symptoms. Most lasted less than an hour before citing scheduling conflicts or better opportunities elsewhere. Michael had almost given up when the agency called about one final candidate. "She's different," the coordinator warned. "Not much formal education, but exceptional references for special needs work." Riley Johnson arrived 20 minutes early, sitting on the porch steps without ringing the doorbell. Michael watched through the front window as she observed the neighborhood, noting which houses had sensory-friendly landscaping, which driveways showed adaptive equipment for disabled residents. She wore faded jeans with holes at the knees, scuffed canvas sneakers, and a navy hoodie that had seen better years. Her brown hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail secured with what looked like a rubber band from the morning newspaper. When Michael finally opened the door, she stood without brushing dirt from her jeans. "You must be Mr. Thompson," she said, extending a hand with short, clean nails and several small scars across the knuckles. Her resume was surprisingly sparse. No college mentioned, just vague references to experience with special needs children and a previous job listed as freelance consulting. Michael pressed for details about her educational background, previous employers, and specific experience with autism spectrum disorders. Riley deflected each question with inquiries about Ethan's daily routine, his sensory triggers, his favorite activities and foods. Does he prefer structured schedules or flexible timing? What helps him during transitions? Are there specific sounds or textures that upset him? Most applicants had elaborate theories about behavioral modification and therapeutic interventions. Riley simply asked practical questions about helping one specific child navigate his world more comfortably. Michael led her through the house, pointing out safety modifications and explaining Ethan's various needs. Riley listened without taking notes, but her eyes cataloged every detail: the dimmer switches installed in every room, the soft clothes cabinet doors that wouldn't slam shut, the sensory corner filled with weighted blankets and textured toys. She paused at the family photos lining the hallway, studying pictures of Sarah holding baby Ethan, both parents beaming with new parent exhaustion and joy. "She was beautiful," Riley said quietly, not asking what happened but somehow understanding the absence that permeated the house. Michael felt his throat tighten at the unexpected kindness in her voice. Ethan sat in the corner of the living room, methodically arranging wooden blocks by color and size. Every potential nanny had tried to engage him immediately, talking, singing, offering different toys, attempting to redirect his attention to their preferred activities. They left frustrated when he ignored their efforts completely, refusing to acknowledge their presence or participate in their games. Some had interpreted his lack of response as defiance or rudeness. Others suggested he needed more aggressive therapeutic intervention to break his obsessive patterns. Michael had grown tired of explaining that his son's behaviors weren't problems to be solved, but communication in a different language. Riley did something Michael had never witnessed before. She sat on the floor exactly 3 feet away from Ethan and began her own block arrangement, creating patterns that complemented rather than competed with his work. She didn't speak to him, didn't try to make eye contact, didn't attempt to redirect his attention. For 20 minutes, she simply existed in his space, building parallel towers and geometric designs. Her movements were deliberate and calm, creating a sense of peaceful coexistence rather than intrusive interaction. Gradually, Ethan's rigid posture relaxed. His quick, anxious glances in her direction became longer observations. Finally, without breaking his concentration on his own pattern, he handed her a blue block. The gesture was subtle, but monumentally significant. Ethan had never voluntarily shared materials with strangers, never acknowledged another person's presence in his organized play space. Riley accepted the block without fanfare, incorporating it seamlessly into her pattern. Ethan continued his work, occasionally passing her additional pieces when her design seemed to need specific colors or shapes. They built together in comfortable silence, 2 minds working in parallel harmony. Michael watched through the doorway, stunned by the natural cooperation developing between his son and this quiet stranger. "When do you need me to start?" Riley asked when Ethan finally tired of the activity. As she spoke, Ethan placed a second blue block in her palm, a farewell gift that indicated acceptance and trust. The first week passed in a rhythm Michael had forgotten was possible. Riley arrived each morning at 7:30, slipping into the house so quietly that Ethan often didn't notice the transition from father to caregiver. She never tried to make him speak or force interactions beyond his comfort level. Instead, she simply existed in his space with infinite patience and understanding. They built block towers together, arranged toys by size and color, and took long walks through the neighborhood where Ethan could examine interesting textures and patterns without pressure to socialize or perform. Riley seemed to intuitively understand his sensory needs, dimming lights when he appeared overwhelmed, playing soft instrumental music during difficult transitions, and creating predictable routines that reduced his anxiety. Michael found himself coming home earlier each day, drawn by the unfamiliar sound of his son's laughter drifting from the backyard. Security cameras throughout the house captured moments of genuine joy that had been rare since Sarah's death. Ethan splashing in a kiddie pool while Riley sat nearby reading, both of them peaceful and content. The boy who had once screamed during bath time now played happily in water, his trust in Riley extending to activities that had previously triggered meltdowns. Michael watched these recordings late at night, marveling at the transformation in his son's emotional state. The rigid anxiety that had characterized Ethan's behavior for months was melting away under Riley's consistent, gentle presence. Their first major outing was a grocery trip to Whole Foods that Michael anticipated with dread. The fluorescent lights, crowded aisles, and overwhelming sensory input typically triggered severe meltdowns that left him abandoning half-filled shopping carts and fleeing the store with a screaming child. This time, Riley suggested they go during off-peak hours, when the store would be quieter and less chaotic. She brought noise-canceling headphones for Ethan and a small tablet loaded with his favorite visual patterns. They moved through the store methodically, allowing Ethan to examine products that interested him without rushing or showing impatience when he needed extra time to process new environments. Halfway through their shopping, the inevitable happened. A promotional display fell over in the next aisle, creating a loud crash that sent Ethan into immediate sensory overload. He began screaming and flailing, drawing stares from other shoppers who clearly viewed his behavior as a parenting failure rather than a neurological response to overwhelming stimuli. Michael felt the familiar panic rising, the urge to abandon everything and run, but Riley stepped calmly between Ethan and the harsh fluorescent lighting, using her body to create a shadowed, protected space. She began humming a barely audible tune, not trying to shush or calm him, but providing a steady auditory anchor in the chaos. Within minutes, Ethan's breathing steadied, his rigid posture softened, and his screams faded to quiet whimpers. Riley guided them to the produce section, the quietest area of the store, where natural lighting and earth-tone displays created a more calming environment. She completed their shopping efficiently, never showing embarrassment about Ethan's episode or rushing to escape other customers' judgment. Her handling of the situation demonstrated professional competence that seemed beyond typical childcare experience. Most babysitters would have been flustered by such a dramatic meltdown. Riley managed it with the expertise of someone who deeply understood autism spectrum responses and had extensive practice helping children navigate sensory challenges. Michael found himself wondering about her background, her training, and the source of her remarkable intuition about his son's needs. The NeuroLearn company picnic on Stanford's campus provided another window into Riley's mysterious qualifications. While other employees' families mingled over barbecue and lawn games, Riley kept Ethan comfortable in a shaded corner near the playground equipment. She had brought a blanket, quiet toys, and snacks that met his specific dietary preferences. When Marcus Chen, the chief technology officer, approached to discuss ongoing debugging challenges with their latest code update, Riley made surprisingly sophisticated observations about edge case handling and algorithm optimization protocols. "Have you considered that your neural network might be overfitting to initial training data?" she asked casually. "Sometimes the system needs deliberate interruption protocols to prevent recursive loops." Marcus stared at her with obvious surprise. The concepts she discussed weren't common knowledge even among experienced programmers. Riley seemed to realize she had revealed too much technical understanding for someone claiming to be just a nanny. She caught herself mid-sentence, quickly redirecting the conversation back to Ethan's needs and development progress. "Sorry, I used to dabble in computer stuff," she said with a dismissive wave. "Nothing serious, just hobby-level tinkering." But Michael noticed how naturally programming concepts flowed from her lips, how precisely she articulated complex technical problems that his senior engineers struggled to explain clearly. Her casual expertise suggested years of professional experience rather than casual hobbyist interest. Evening routines transformed dramatically under Riley's influence. Previously, bedtime had been a battlefield. Ethan fighting every transition, screaming through toothbrushing, refusing to lie down for sleep. Riley established a new ritual that honored his need for predictability while making necessary activities less traumatic. First, they would arrange blocks in numerical sequence from 1 through 10, counting aloud together. Then Ethan would carefully place each block in a designated wooden box, creating closure for the day's activities. Finally, Riley would dim the lights gradually while playing soft instrumental music, allowing his nervous system to slowly adjust to nighttime rhythms rather than forcing abrupt transitions. The boy who once fought sleep for hours now settled peacefully within 30 minutes of beginning their routine. Michael often returned from late meetings to find both Riley and Ethan asleep. She on the living room couch with a book in her lap, he in his bed, clutching the small wooden hourglass that had become his comfort object. Riley's laptop sat open beside her on those evenings, displaying what looked like complex code repositories with file names like autism_intervention_algorithms and sensory_processing_models. When Michael asked about her late-night computer work, she mentioned freelance web design projects for small businesses, but quickly closed the screen whenever he approached. Something about her explanation felt rehearsed and incomplete, as if she were hiding the true nature of her technical activities. One morning, Michael discovered a handwritten note stuck to his coffee maker. Pattern recognition equals behavioral prediction. The phrase was written in Riley's precise handwriting, but the insight seemed too sophisticated for casual observation. It nagged at him throughout the following day's engineering meetings, where his team remained stuck on the same fundamental problem that had plagued NeuroLearn for months. Their artificial intelligence system could identify autistic behavioral patterns with impressive accuracy, but failed catastrophically when attempting to predict what interventions might actually help individual children. The algorithms recognized repetitive behaviors, sensory sensitivities, and communication differences, but couldn't translate that recognition into effective support strategies. The note's insight cut directly to the heart of their technical challenges. Pattern recognition was indeed different from behavioral prediction, a distinction that seemed obvious once articulated, but had eluded 15 experienced engineers for half a year. When Michael asked Riley about the note over dinner, she shrugged casually and said she'd been thinking about Ethan's routines while making coffee. Alan follows patterns, but not always the same ones, she explained. Sometimes he needs to break his own rules to feel better. Her explanation felt carefully crafted, revealing just enough insight to seem helpful while concealing deeper technical understanding. Michael sensed layers of knowledge behind her simple words, expertise that extended far beyond observational childcare skills. Michael's suspicions crystallized during a routine smart home system check. Their house was equipped with sophisticated automation, programmable lighting, climate control, security cameras, and integrated entertainment systems. Most visitors struggled with the complex interfaces for days, accidentally triggering alarms or failing to adjust basic settings. Riley moved through their technological environment with unconscious expertise, adjusting lighting and temperature controls without pause or confusion. She seemed to intuitively understand not just the system's functions, but its underlying logic architecture. When motion sensors failed to register Ethan's presence in certain rooms, she diagnosed and corrected the calibration issues faster than their professional installation team. "You seem pretty comfortable with technology," Michael mentioned one evening, as Riley effortlessly programmed new automation sequences for Ethan's bedtime routine. The system required understanding of Boolean logic, conditional statements, and device integration protocols. Riley's fingers moved across the interface with practiced efficiency, creating custom settings that perfectly matched Ethan's sensory needs. "Modern technology is everywhere," she deflected. "You pick things up." But Michael had spent enough years in Silicon Valley to recognize genuine engineering intuition when he saw it. Riley possessed knowledge that extended far beyond typical consumer familiarity. She understood how systems worked at fundamental levels, how to troubleshoot complex problems, and how to optimize performance through subtle adjustments that required deep technical expertise. Late one Thursday night, Michael caught Riley debugging what appeared to be sophisticated machine learning algorithms on her personal laptop. The code structures looked familiar: neural network implementations with specialized modules for autism intervention protocols, very similar to NeuroLearn's proprietary systems. Multiple terminal windows displayed real-time data processing, algorithm optimization routines, and statistical analysis that would be challenging for experienced software engineers. Riley's concentration was complete, her fingers flying across the keyboard with the fluency of someone who thought in programming languages. This wasn't hobbyist tinkering or freelance web design. This was advanced artificial intelligence development at professional levels. "What exactly are you working on?" Michael asked quietly, trying not to startle her. Riley's fingers froze over the keyboard before slowly closing the laptop lid. Her face cycled through several expressions: surprise, guilt, calculation, and finally, resignation. "Just a pet project," she said, but her voice carried the practiced tone of someone accustomed to concealing technical activities. "A pet project involving machine learning for autism intervention?" Michael pressed, his suspicions hardening into certainty. "That's remarkably similar to my company's focus area." Riley stood up from the couch, suddenly defensive. "Ethan needs consistency," she replied, deflecting his questions. "Don't make him afraid by questioning everything around him." The deflection felt like confirmation rather than denial. Riley was clearly capable of advanced software development, understood autism intervention protocols at sophisticated levels, and had access to algorithms remarkably similar to NeuroLearn's proprietary systems. Michael's mind raced through possibilities: corporate espionage, competitor infiltration, intellectual property theft. Had someone planted Riley in his household to steal company secrets? Was his son's well-being being used as cover for industrial sabotage? The questions multiplied faster than answers, each possibility more disturbing than the last. Riley's expertise with Ethan could be genuine, while her presence in their lives served ulterior motives. Trust and paranoia warred in Michael's chest as he watched her pack up her laptop and retreat to the guest room without further explanation. The next afternoon at the neighborhood playground, Michael's questions became more direct and confrontational. Riley watched Ethan navigate the jungle gym with other children, intervening only when sensory overload threatened his composure. Her attention never wavered from his needs. Her responses to his distress remained immediate and appropriate. If she was using him for some hidden agenda, her care appeared genuine rather than calculated. "How do you understand my company's code architecture so well?" Michael asked bluntly, abandoning subtlety for direct confrontation. "I've seen you discuss technical concepts that most programmers struggle with. Your laptop shows development work that requires years of professional experience. Either you're much more qualified than your resume indicates, or you're here under false pretenses." Riley's jaw tightened as she continued watching Ethan play. "Do you have trust issues with everyone, or just with me?" she countered, not taking her eyes off his son. "With people who won't tell me who they really are," Michael replied, his voice rising slightly. "I trusted you with my child, with access to my home, with knowledge about my company's struggles. If you're not who you claim to be, I need to know." Several other parents turned to look at them, sensing tension in their conversation. Riley guided them away from the playground toward a quieter corner of the park, where they could speak without attracting attention or upsetting Ethan. Her protective instinct toward his comfort remained consistent, even during their confrontation. "You hired me to take care of Ethan," Riley said finally, her voice carefully controlled. "I've done that job better than anyone else you've interviewed. He's healthier, happier, and more confident than he's been since your wife died. If my technical background bothers you, find someone else." Her words carried both frustration and hurt, as if Michael's suspicions wounded her more deeply than simple professional pride. "But don't pretend this is about qualifications or honesty. This is about you being afraid to trust anyone completely because losing your wife destroyed your faith in permanence." The observation was uncomfortably accurate, cutting through Michael's accusations to expose the deeper fears driving his paranoia. The confrontation Michael had been avoiding finally erupted when he decided to show Riley NeuroLearn's current failure logs. If she truly understood the technical challenges they faced, her response would reveal the extent of her expertise. He pulled up months of error reports, algorithm optimization attempts, and failed debugging sessions on his laptop. The data represented thousands of hours of work by talented engineers who couldn't solve fundamental problems in their artificial intelligence systems. "Since you seem to understand our technology so well," Michael said with barely concealed hostility, "maybe you can explain why nothing we try actually works." Riley's response was immediate and sophisticated, revealing knowledge that shattered any remaining pretense about her background. She identified bottlenecks in data processing pipelines that his team had missed, suggested algorithmic modifications for edge case handling that addressed specific failure modes, and proposed neural network architecture improvements that his senior engineers hadn't considered. Her recommendations were too precise, too advanced, too deeply informed about NeuroLearn's proprietary systems for casual observation or hobbyist interest. "Your training data is biased toward neurotypical learning patterns," she explained rapidly, her professional expertise overriding her attempt at concealment. "The algorithms assume linear progression, but autistic minds don't work that way. You're trying to force square pegs into round holes." Michael stared at her with a mixture of awe and anger. "You're a software engineer," he stated flatly. "You've been lying to me since day one." Riley's composure cracked slightly, revealing exhaustion and resignation beneath her careful facade. "I burned out," she admitted quietly. I needed a complete break from the tech industry, from programming, from the constant pressure to innovate and optimize and disrupt. I took this job because I wanted to help one child, instead of trying to solve problems for millions of users I'd never meet. Her explanation felt genuine, but incomplete, as if larger truths remained hidden beneath this partial confession. "Why not tell me from the beginning?" Michael demanded. "Because you wouldn't have hired me," Riley replied without hesitation. "You would have assumed I had some agenda, some ulterior motive for wanting to work with your son. Silicon Valley is full of people who can't imagine anyone stepping away from high-paying tech jobs for personal reasons. You would have thought I was conducting corporate espionage or trying to steal your algorithm." Her prediction was uncomfortably accurate. Michael's immediate assumption had been exactly that kind of paranoid calculation. The tech industry's competitive culture had trained him to view expertise as either asset or threat, making genuine human connection nearly impossible. Michael's phone buzzed with a security alert that changed everything. GhostByte's signature detected on home network. The notification sent ice through his veins as he recognized the hacker alias that had haunted NeuroLearn 2 years prior. Ghostbite had penetrated their systems during the company's vulnerable early stages, exposing security flaws that nearly destroyed them before they'd even launched their first product. Riley's face went pale as she saw the alert on his screen, her expression shifting from defensive frustration to something approaching terror. "You know what this means," Michael said quietly, his voice deadly calm. "You know exactly who Ghostbite is." Marcus Chen's urgent phone call confirmed Michael's worst fears. Comprehensive background analysis had finally revealed Riley's true identity through digital forensics and network traffic analysis. She wasn't just any software engineer with mysterious qualifications. She was the anonymous hacker who had penetrated their systems, exposed their vulnerabilities, and nearly destroyed his company during its most critical development phase. "She's been in your house for months," Marcus said over speakerphone. "She's had access to everything, your personal systems, your son's medical information, your company's proprietary research. We need to call the police immediately." Michael felt the bottom drop out of his world as 18 months of careful trust-building crumbled into paranoia and betrayal. "You've been lying to me every single day," he said, his voice barely controlled as he faced Riley across the playground. "You infiltrated my home, my son's life, everything I care about. You've been playing some long game that I'm too stupid to understand." The wounds from Sarah's sudden death ripped open again, the reminder that people could disappear without warning, that trust was a luxury he couldn't afford as a single parent responsible for a vulnerable child. "I opened my home to you. I trusted you with Ethan, and you've been deceiving me from the very first handshake." Riley's explanation came in broken fragments, her usual composure shattered by the weight of secrets finally exposed. She hadn't intended to deceive him about her identity. The Nanny job application was genuine desperation after burning out of the tech industry following a personal tragedy. She'd been Ghostbite, yes, but not a malicious hacker seeking to destroy companies for profit or entertainment. 2 years ago, she'd discovered massive security vulnerabilities in NeuroLearn's database that were exposing sensitive information about autistic children to third-party data brokers. Medical records, therapy notes, behavioral assessments, and family information were being sold to marketing companies, research organizations, and anyone willing to pay for detailed profiles of vulnerable children. The data breach wasn't theoretical. Real children were being harmed by the information leak. Riley's younger brother Danny, also on the autism spectrum, had been bullied and harassed after his personal therapy records leaked from a similar learning application. Kids at school had found his behavioral assessments online and turned them into weapons for psychological torture. They knew everything about his triggers, his fears, his private struggles, Riley explained through tears. They used his medical information to hurt him in the most specific, cruel ways possible. Danny had endured months of targeted harassment before the source of the leak was discovered and patched. Riley had hacked NeuroLearn not to destroy the company, but to patch the vulnerabilities and protect other children from Danny's fate. Her intrusion had been surgical, identifying security flaws, implementing fixes, and documenting the problems for legitimate resolution. She'd tried to contact the company through official channels first, but her warnings were dismissed as competitive interference or attention-seeking behavior. Only after exhausting legal options had she resorted to unauthorized access to prevent ongoing harm to vulnerable children. The revelation that she'd actually been trying to protect kids like Ethan rather than exploit them didn't diminish Michael's sense of betrayal, but it complicated his moral calculations about her action. The damage to Riley's reputation in the tech community had been irreversible, despite her protective motives. No company wanted to hire a known system infiltrator, regardless of her justifications or the positive outcomes of her actions. Security clearances were revoked, job applications rejected, and professional relationships severed. The industry that had once valued her expertise now viewed her as a liability and a threat. "I spent 2 years applying for legitimate positions," Riley explained. "Every background check flagged the NeuroLearn incident. Every interview ended with questions about whether I could be trusted not to hack my employer's systems. I couldn't even get freelance contracts because clients were afraid I'd steal their data or expose their vulnerabilities." The revelation hit Michael like a physical blow as he processed the full scope of Riley's sacrifice. "Your brother," he said quietly, understanding beginning to replace anger. Riley's composure finally shattered completely as years of suppressed grief poured out. "Danny killed himself 6 months after the data leak," she whispered. "He was 12 years old. The bullying escalated until he couldn't take it anymore. Kids at school had printed out his therapy notes and passed them around like entertainment. They knew exactly which words would hurt him most, which fears would paralyze him, which triggers would send him into meltdowns they could record and share online." The guilt in Riley's voice was devastating to witness. She'd spent years blaming herself for failing to protect Danny, convinced that her inability to prevent his harassment made her unworthy of working with vulnerable children. Taking the nanny position had felt like penance, a chance to help one child succeed in ways she'd failed to help her brother. "I thought if I could keep Ethan safe, if I could help him thrive, maybe I could live with myself again," she continued. "Maybe I could prove that all the damage to my career meant something, if it prevented another family from losing their child." Michael felt the weight of his accusations crushing down on him as he understood the true scope of Riley's motivation. She hadn't infiltrated his family for corporate espionage or personal gain. She'd sacrificed her career to protect children like his son, then spent years trying to rebuild a life that honored her brother's memory. Every patient interaction with Ethan, every late night of algorithm development, every moment of genuine care had been driven by love and loss that mirrored Michael's own experience of parenting through tragedy. Riley hadn't betrayed his trust for selfish reasons. She'd been trying to save children, just as he was trying to help his son. The confrontation escalated beyond rational discussion, as Michael's protective instincts overrode his developing sympathy. Losing Sarah had left him terrified of trusting anyone with Ethan's welfare, and Riley's deception, however well-intentioned, triggered every paranoid fear he'd been suppressing. "Pack your things," he said coldly, his voice carrying finality that surprised them both. "I won't press charges, but you need to leave my house tonight. I can't have someone with your history around my son." The words felt like betrayal even as he spoke them, but his fear was stronger than his compassion. Riley accepted his decision without argument, but made one final request that revealed the depth of her commitment to Ethan's well-being. "Let me fix the algorithm before I go," she said quietly. "This isn't about you or me anymore. It's about Ethan and thousands of other kids who need this technology to work properly." Michael's wounded pride wouldn't allow him to accept help from someone who'd deceived him so completely. "I don't need charity from you," he replied harshly. "My team will solve our own problems." "This isn't charity," Riley insisted. "This is responsibility. I know how to fix what's broken, and these children can't wait for your engineers to figure it out through trial and error." Their argument was interrupted by Ethan's most severe meltdown in months. The boy had been playing quietly nearby, but the raised voices and emotional tension triggered his anxiety into full crisis mode. He began screaming and throwing his toys, hitting himself in frustration as his nervous system overloaded with stress. Michael panicked, his usual calming techniques failing completely as Ethan's distress escalated beyond anything he'd experienced since Riley joined their household. The boy who had been thriving under her care was suddenly unreachable, lost in a storm of sensory overload and emotional chaos. Riley's response was immediate and instinctive, her professional disagreement with Michael instantly secondary to Ethan's needs. She approached slowly, speaking in the soft tones that had always calmed him, using body language that communicated safety rather than threat. Within minutes, Ethan's screams subsided to quiet whimpers as he allowed Riley to guide him to their usual comfort corner with weighted blankets and familiar texture. Michael watched in amazement as his son responded to her touch with trust he'd never shown anyone else. Not therapists, not teachers, not even his own father during similar episodes. "He's never responded to me like that," Michael admitted quietly as Riley helped Ethan regulate his breathing and heart rate. "You're the only person who can reach him when he gets that overwhelmed." The observation forced Michael to confront the reality that his paranoia might be hurting Ethan more than Riley's deception ever could. His son had formed a bond with her that transcended professional caregiving. She understood his needs at levels that couldn't be faked or manipulated for ulterior motives. If Michael forced her to leave, he would be destroying the most positive relationship Ethan had built since his mother's death. 3 days after Riley's departure, Ethan's regression was alarming and heartbreaking to witness. He refused to eat his favorite foods, couldn't settle into sleep without his established routine, and showed no interest in the block arrangements that had been his primary source of comfort for months. The boy who had been making steady progress toward independence was sliding backward into isolation and anxiety. Michael tried to maintain their established routines, but his own emotional state was too turbulent to provide the consistent calm that Ethan needed. Every attempt at comfort felt forced and artificial compared to Riley's natural understanding of his son's needs. The NeuroLearn algorithm continued failing spectacularly, with error rates climbing toward complete system breakdown. Beta testing results grew worse each day as the artificial intelligence proved incapable of adapting to real-world autism interventions. Michael found himself staring at the tiny wooden hourglass on his desk, Sarah's last gift, a reminder that patience and time could transform anything if given proper attention. He flipped it obsessively, watching sand fall in different patterns each time, remembering Riley's words about algorithms needing to learn interruption rather than prediction. The solution felt tantalizingly close, but his wounded pride and paralyzing fear kept him from reaching toward the help he desperately needed. The emergency call came at 2:17 in the morning on a Tuesday. Ethan had suffered a seizure at preschool during an overnight field trip, a stress episode triggered by routine disruption, unfamiliar sleeping arrangements, and accumulated anxiety from Riley's absence. The paramedics were professional and competent, but they couldn't calm Ethan's post-seizure panic and disorientation. "He keeps asking for Riley," the emergency room nurse explained over the phone. "He won't let anyone else touch him or examine him properly. We need his primary caregiver here immediately." Michael called Riley without thinking, his desperation overriding wounded pride and lingering paranoia. She answered on the first ring despite the late hour, her voice immediately alert and focused. "Is Ethan okay?" she asked before he could explain the situation. Within 20 minutes she arrived at the hospital still wearing pajamas and mismatched shoes, her face etched with worry and determination. Ethan's vital signs stabilized the moment Riley took his hand, his rigid panic dissolving into exhausted relief. Medical staff commented on the remarkable bond between the child and his caregiver, noting how her presence seemed to regulate his entire nervous system. "You're the only person who can calm him like this," the attending physician observed as Riley helped Ethan through post-seizure recovery protocols. "His stress responses normalize completely when you're present. That's not something we see often, even with parents." Michael realized how profoundly he'd underestimated the genuine connection between Riley and his son. This wasn't manipulation or professional competence. It was authentic love and understanding that couldn't be faked or produced for strategic advantage. Riley's dedication to Ethan's well-being was real, regardless of her deception about her technical background. Sitting in the pediatric ward's waiting room at 4 in the morning, Riley finally told Michael the complete truth about her brother's death and her subsequent motivation for helping autistic children. Danny's suicide hadn't been just about data leaks and bullying, though those factors had certainly contributed to his despair. Her brother had been failed by every learning system designed to help him, algorithms that tried to force his unique mind into neurotypical patterns instead of working with his natural processing style. Educational technology, therapeutic interventions, and behavioral modification programs had all approached Danny's autism as a problem to be solved, rather than a different way of thinking to be supported and celebrated. After Danny's death, Riley had dedicated herself to understanding how autistic minds actually functioned, rather than how developers and therapists assumed they should function. She'd spent years studying neurodiversity research, interviewing autistic adults about their experiences, and developing technology that honored different cognitive styles instead of trying to normalize them. Her hack into NeuroLearn hadn't been random vandalism or corporate espionage. She'd spent months studying their code, recognizing the same fundamental flaw that had failed her brother repeatedly. The company was treating autism as a deviation from normal brain function, rather than an alternative form of intelligence that required different support strategies. Danny was brilliant, Riley explained through exhausted tears, saw patterns and connections that nobody else noticed. He could solve complex puzzles in minutes that took other kids hours. But every system designed to help him focused on his deficits instead of his strengths. They wanted to fix his stimming, normalize his communication style, force him to make eye contact, and engage in reciprocal conversation. Nobody asked what he needed to thrive. They just tried to make him more like neurotypical children. The breakthrough came while watching Ethan interact with hospital equipment during his recovery. Riley observed him systematically touching different machines: the blood pressure monitor, heart rate display, IV pump controls, then suddenly stepping back and starting over with a completely different approach. His behavior wasn't random or compulsive. It was methodical exploration, followed by deliberate reset and reapproach. "Pattern interruption," she whispered to Michael, her voice filled with sudden understanding. "That's what your algorithm is missing. Ethan isn't failing when he breaks his own patterns. He's demonstrating exactly how his brain processes information most effectively." NeuroLearn's artificial intelligence had been programmed to identify consistent behavioral patterns in autistic children, then suggest interventions based on maintaining or redirecting those patterns toward more socially acceptable outcomes. But Riley realized this approach fundamentally misunderstood how autistic minds actually work. "Your system tries to predict behavior by analyzing past patterns," she explained rapidly, her technical expertise overriding exhaustion and emotional trauma. "But autistic brains don't work linearly. They need chaos intervals, moments of complete disruption that allow for mental reset and new pattern formation. When Ethan scatters his blocks after building perfect towers, he's not destroying his work. He's creating space for his mind to approach the problem from an entirely different angle." Michael pulled up NeuroLearn's code repository on his laptop right there in the hospital room, desperate to understand what Riley was describing. Working together over Ethan's sleeping form, they examined months of failed algorithm attempts and error logs. Riley identified the core problem within minutes. The AI was trying to eliminate unpredictable behaviors rather than incorporating them as essential elements of autistic learning processes. "You need to program interruption protocols," she explained, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she demonstrated code modifications. "Random moments where the system pauses, resets, and approaches problems from completely different directions. The algorithm needs to learn chaos, not just order." The solution was elegantly simple once Riley explained the underlying neuroscience. Instead of programming the AI to maintain consistent learning patterns, they needed to introduce deliberate subroutines that mirrored autistic cognitive processing. Children like Ethan didn't learn through steady progression. They absorbed information in bursts, processed it during apparent downtime, then demonstrated understanding through sudden leaps that seemed unconnected to previous activity. Traditional educational algorithms couldn't accommodate this non-linear learning style, which explained why so many autistic children struggled with technology designed to help them. For the first time in 6 months, NeuroLearn's algorithm began producing positive results as they implemented chaos interval protocols. Beta testing children showed immediate improvement when the system learned to respect their need for mental reset rather than fighting against their natural processing rhythms. The artificial intelligence stopped trying to force autistic minds into neurotypical learning patterns and instead adapted to support different cognitive styles. Error rates dropped dramatically as the system learned to work with neurodiversity rather than against it. Michael watched real-time data showing children engaging more successfully with educational content that honored their unique ways of thinking and learning. The technical breakthrough paled beside the emotional revelation unfolding in that hospital room. Michael realized his trust issues stemmed not from Riley's deception about her identity, but from his own terror of losing another person he'd grown to depend on completely. Sarah's sudden death had shattered his faith in permanence, making him paranoid about trusting anyone with Ethan's welfare or his own emotional well-being. Riley's secrecy about her hacker background felt like preparation for abandonment, another person with hidden depths who might disappear without warning, leaving him alone to manage responsibilities that felt overwhelming in isolation. "I'm not going anywhere," Riley said quietly, somehow understanding the fears he couldn't articulate. "I know you're afraid that caring about people means losing them eventually. But running away from connection doesn't protect you from loss. It just guarantees you'll be alone when challenges come." Her observation cut to the heart of Michael's emotional paralysis. He'd been so focused on protecting himself and Ethan from potential betrayal that he'd nearly destroyed the most positive relationship either of them had built since Sarah's death. Trust wasn't a luxury he couldn't afford. It was a necessity for creating the family environment that Ethan needed to thrive. When Michael offered Riley the position of Chief Technology Officer the next morning, she declined immediately and firmly. "I don't want to return to the corporate world," she said, gathering her things from the hospital room as Ethan continued sleeping peacefully. "The tech industry destroyed my mental health once. I won't let it happen again." Michael felt panic rising at the thought of losing her expertise and her relationship with Ethan. "Then stay as his nanny," he said quickly, "and as a consultant." "Consultant for what?" Riley asked, pausing in her packing. "For teaching me how to be a better father. For helping NeuroLearn actually serve the children it's supposed to help. For showing me how to build a family that works for all of us." The conversation happened quietly in Ethan's hospital room, with their son sleeping peacefully between them, his small hand still clutching the wooden hourglass that had become his primary comfort object. Neither Michael nor Riley made grand declarations about love or commitment or the future of their relationship. They simply acknowledged that their fractured trust could be rebuilt through consistent actions rather than emotional promises. Riley agreed to stay not as an employee bound by contracts and professional obligations, but as chosen family, committed to Ethan's well-being and each other's growth. The arrangement felt more solid than legal documents or romantic declarations. It was a practical partnership, built on shared values and mutual respect. 6 months later, the Thompson household had found its sustainable rhythm. Saturday mornings began with Riley making pancakes in the kitchen, while Ethan arranged fresh blueberries in geometric patterns across his plate. Perfect circles, straight lines, complex fractals that demonstrated mathematical thinking far beyond typical 4-year-old capabilities. Michael read the newspaper at the kitchen table, occasionally checking work emails but no longer obsessing over every crisis or deadline. The urgent desperation that had characterized their early months had been replaced by confident collaboration and shared responsibility. NeuroLearn's breakthrough algorithm had helped thousands of autistic children worldwide, earning recognition as revolutionary assistive technology that actually honored neurodiversity rather than trying to eliminate it. Riley worked remotely as Chief Technology Officer despite her initial reluctance, building systems that respected different cognitive styles instead of forcing conformity to neurotypical expectations. The company's success felt less important than the quiet contentment that filled their Victorian house each morning. The sound of Ethan's laughter, the sight of Riley's patient smile, the knowledge that they'd created something sustainable and nurturing together. Ethan's progress amazed his teachers, therapists, and pediatricians. While still primarily nonverbal, he communicated through gestures, expressions, and actions that Riley and Michael understood intuitively. His meltdowns had become rare occurrences rather than daily struggles. Replaced by confident exploration of new environments and experiences, the boy who once hid from social interaction now approached other children with curiosity, sharing toys and including others in his elaborate play schemes. His happiness reflected the emotional stability that Riley and Michael had created together, not as romantic partners, but as committed co-parents who understood that love manifests through consistent actions rather than dramatic declarations. The tiny wooden hourglass had moved from Michael's office to Ethan's bedroom dresser, where it sat among family photos, favorite books, and carefully arranged collections of interesting objects. The glass was slightly cracked now, worn from countless handlings by small fingers, but it still functioned perfectly as a tool for understanding time and change. Ethan had developed an evening ritual of flipping it 3 times before bed, watching sand fall in different patterns each time, sometimes fast, sometimes slow, always unique and beautiful in its unpredictability. One warm Tuesday evening, Ethan picked up the hourglass and walked next door to meet the new family moving into the renovated Craftsman house. Their 5-year-old daughter was also on the autism spectrum, struggling with transitions to unfamiliar environments and overwhelming anxiety about starting kindergarten in the fall. Without speaking, Ethan handed her the hourglass and demonstrated how to flip it, watching sand cascade in soothing, mesmerizing patterns. The little girl's rigid posture relaxed as she focused on the gentle rhythm of falling sand. Her mother watched through tears as 2 children connected through shared understanding, rather than forced conversation. The neighborhood had embraced Riley as a permanent fixture in the Thompson family constellation. Ethan's teachers praised his continued development and growing confidence in group activities. Neighbors invited all 3 of them to community events, barbecues, holiday parties, and informal gatherings where Ethan played comfortably with other children, while adults discussed typical suburban concerns. Other parents sought Riley's advice about supporting their own special needs children, recognizing her unique combination of technical expertise and practical experience. Michael no longer felt isolated in his parenting journey, surrounded instead by a community of people who understood and accepted Ethan's differences as valuable contributions rather than problems to be solved. The story concluded not with romantic revelation or dramatic business triumph, but with the quiet satisfaction of sustainable happiness built through patience, understanding, and mutual commitment. Riley and Michael never discussed the exact nature of their relationship, beyond co-parenting partnership and professional collaboration. They had discovered something more valuable than traditional romance, a shared dedication to creating an environment where Ethan could thrive as his authentic self, rather than a modified version designed to meet neurotypical expectations. On a peaceful autumn evening, Michael found Riley and Ethan in the backyard, teaching their neighbor's daughter how to arrange fallen leaves by color gradients and texture variations. The scene was unremarkable in its simplicity. 3 people sharing knowledge and patience with a child who needed extra understanding and support. No dramatic declarations marked the moment. No profound realizations changed their relationship dynamics. They had simply become a family through accumulated days of choosing to support each other through challenges large and small, celebrating differences as strengths rather than viewing them as obstacles to overcome. Michael watched from the kitchen window as Ethan spontaneously hugged Riley, then reached for their neighbor's hand to include her in their leaf-sorting activity. The gesture represented everything he had hoped to achieve when he started NeuroLearn, a world where different minds were celebrated and supported, rather than corrected and normalized. Their success wasn't measured in company valuations, media recognition, or personal achievements, but in a 4-year-old boy's growing confidence and the expanding community of acceptance they had built around him. As evening settled over their Palo Alto neighborhood, Ethan flipped the wooden hourglass one final time, watching sand cascade in its eternal, unpredictable pattern while his chosen family gathered around him in comfortable silence. Some things can't be programmed, Michael thought, observing his son demonstrate patience and kindness to another child who needed understanding. but they can be learned through practice and commitment. Riley might have thought something similar, but she simply said, "Some things can't be debugged with code, but they can be accepted with love." The hourglass completed its cycle in perfect quiet, a reminder that time transforms everything, even broken trust and wounded hearts, into something beautiful, whole, and enduring.